Tonight on Ukraine Today, a sudden escalation. The United States has seized an oil tanker sailing under the Russian flag and linked to Venezuela. Draft security guarantees. What did European leaders agree on in Paris, and what role do the United States play? Critical questions. What and who is blocking the peace plan and security guarantees implementation for Ukraine? Battlefield update. How the Pokrovsk direction became a real blow to Putin's imperial ambitions. The White House versus the Kremlin. Why Washington openly mocks Russian air defense systems and what that really means. All this and more, right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Thank you. Let's start with a situation that is unfolding right now, literally before our eyes. The United States has seized the oil tanker Marinera, which was sailing under the Russian flag, and it's reportedly connected to Venezuela. It is known that the tanker, previously called Bella 1, managed to slip through the US maritime blockade and later changed its registration to Russia. There are also reports that Russian warships and even a submarine were operating close to the tanker, but they did not intervene. Most likely, by the time this episode is published, the situation will have already developed further. Maybe there are new details, maybe there are serious diplomatic consequences, and maybe, just maybe, this is something much bigger. Write in the comments what has already happened by now. Now about the enemy losses and the overall situation on the battlefield, then diplomatic developments over the last 24 hours, Russian attacks and the global impact of the war launched by Russia against Ukraine. In short, a lot of important and interesting information. Let's get to the news. So, over the past day, Russia lost at least 1,040 troops killed and wounded. That brings total Russian losses since the full-scale invasion to 1,214,500 invaders. In addition, during the last 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 2 armored combat vehicles, 26 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. Ukraine's Special Operation Forces struck Russian logistics in temporarily occupied territories. More details on the battlefield situation in the report.
The new year began in flames for Russians. Here is a drone attack on the bearing plant in Penza.
That's already an explosion. That's at the plant.
Explosions at the petrochemical plant in Sterletamak, Bashkortostan, and at the oil depot in Usman-Lipetsk region. And this is only the beginning of the defeat of legitimate military targets by the Ukrainian defense forces. The friendly drones are not sparing the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories either. Russian telegram channels showed the aftermath of a strike on a Russian forces strongpoint set up in the basement of a hospital in Kupiansk, Kharkiv region. The occupiers admit the effectiveness of the Ukrainian pilot strike, as a result of which the Russian headquarters was completely destroyed and there is no contact with those who were there. This video exposes a rat in Kupiansk who was directing enemy fire at the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukrainians identified the enemy's location and captured him. And here is another successful operation to contain about 50 Russians in the Kupiansk direction. The enemy tried to use the Soyuz gas pipeline for a covert withdrawal and further buildup of forces. As a result of the operation, the Russians did not achieve their objectives, and the situation in the area of responsibility has been stabilized, according to the defense forces.
Kupiansk is almost entirely under the control of Ukraine's defense forces. There is so-called sporadic resistance from the Russian occupiers. These are blocked small assault groups that have no access to ground logistics. Logistics are carried out using heavy quadcopters.
The Russian Federation has reinforced its motorized rifle brigades in the Hulyapol direction with Bars assault regiments. Hulyapol itself has been destroyed by 30 to 40%. This is according to the soldiers who are holding the defense there.
The Hulyapol direction allows the occupiers to transfer operational reserves, taking into account the terrain. The terrain there is quite complex when it comes to detecting the personnel of small assault groups.
The intensification of hostilities in the Hulyapol direction has more political than military significance for the Kremlin.
Against the backdrop of failures regarding the Russian dictator's claims about capturing Pokrovsk, Kupiansk and Mirnohrad, it is extremely important for him to demonstrate both to the Russian audience and first and foremost to the American president the capabilities of Russian troops in occupying key settlements in Ukraine.
Hulyapol is the second largest city in Zaporizhia region, which in theory could allow the occupiers to gain fire control over Zaporizhia. But as practice shows, all the occupiers' grand plans are shattered by the Ukrainian defense. Therefore, in essence, the occupiers are opening yet another front for which they will once again be ashamed.
The General Staff of Ukraine confirmed strikes on an oil depot in Russia's Lipetsk region, as well as several other facilities. Ukrainian attacks also hit drone command centers in the Pokrovsk area and in Russia's Kursk and Belgorod regions. Over the past 7 months, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have inflicted $20 billion in damage on the enemy. All the details next.
In 7 months, targets worth $20 billion. The defense forces set an absolute record for destroying Russian equipment and assets on the front line, carrying out just under 1 million sorties on combat missions.
22222. Excellent.
The report on the work done was posted on Facebook by the UAV systems forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and the numbers in it are truly impressive. Since the creation of the UAV systems forces, in just under half a year, more than 50,000 occupiers have already been eliminated, and this figure continues to grow every month as the operational range of UAVs expands.
Unmanned systems are increasingly making more and more of the front line incredibly dangerous, and the significant distance from the actual line of contact, both deeply into the enemy's operational space and also extensively into ours, is becoming ever more profoundly deeper and more expansive. As of today, the maximum such complex zone is 15. You could say that by the end of 2025, we reached a point where 25 kilometers became the most dangerous area for everything located there. By the middle of 2026, this distance will increase approximately to 34, 35, or possibly even 40 kilometers.
Despite the fact that Russia is also making progress in the field of unmanned systems, experts say that the undisputed leadership in drone innovation belongs to the Ukrainian armed forces. This is primarily due to the decisions that commanders often make independently on the ground.
The company of ground-based unmanned systems of the 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has developed and is using an original version of an assault ground drone, armed with a block of unguided aviation rockets NARS-5. The company commander with the call sign Electrician who proposed this concept said that the idea arose from a desire to increase the firepower of mobile ground platforms. The inspiration came from a UB-1657 rocket pod found on an old Soviet combat aircraft that had served as a monument for decades. The structure was carefully dismantled and restored for reuse.
Hence the results. According to the same report from the drone operators, since May 2025, more than 7,500 Russian vehicles used to break through to positions have been destroyed, as well as over 5,500 motorcycles and another 2,500 cannons and howitzers. And of course, what would it be without heavy equipment? During the same period, the Russians lost 532 tanks and 100 units of light armored vehicles.
The drone successfully reached the ambush site and waited for the Russian armored personnel carrier Motoliga with infantry. The ground drone opened fire on the front of the armored vehicle and damaged its control system, after which the Motoliga began to move uncontrollably. Then the TV-12.7 drone turned around and fired at the troop compartment of the armored personnel carrier with the Russian infantry inside. After the battle, reconnaissance UAVs surveyed the area and discovered the Motoliga and the bodies of the eliminated occupiers in the forest belt.
At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces use drones not only for attacks. In recent months, they have become a crucial element of Ukrainian logistics in the combat zone and have already saved hundreds of our soldiers' lives.
Robotic ground systems are used to evacuate wounded servicemen of the Ukrainian army. We should also mention that logistical support is carried out by delivering cargo, by air, both with small reconnaissance drones and with heavy bombers, the key ones being in service with, for example, the Armed Forces Vampire system or other drones capable of carrying significant loads.
At the same time, our command clearly understands the necessity of developing unmanned systems at the front. That's why new and innovative solutions are constantly being introduced for the forward positions of the defense forces.
Ukraine is planning to create robotic strongpoints that will be equipped with combat modules to counter Russian occupiers. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
And while government programs are working on the large-scale technologization of the front, our soldiers are also improving their UAVs on their own. The latest trend at the end of 2025 has been new batteries for drones, which are already allowing for more effective operation with existing equipment.
Now, new and innovative types of advanced batteries are making them significantly lighter, while simultaneously increasing their overall charge capacity. As a direct and beneficial result, the drone powered by these remarkable new batteries can fly much farther and for extended periods. The farther a drone can effectively fly and deliver its useful payloads, in our specific case, these are munitions, the more effectively and precisely we can target the enemy in those critical areas where they are actively gathering before they begin moving towards the actual line of contact.
They are also working on UAV upgrades across the border. The latest invention is the upgraded Shaheds, which are now equipped with anti-aircraft missile systems. Recently, our air defense shot down just such a drone. These missiles are intended to counter Ukrainian aircraft that shoot down enemy drones. However, according to analysts, although this new development has caused a stir, it does not pose any significant danger.
You need to get a good lock on the target in order to launch a manpads. Moreover, you have to keep the target locked for some time because a manpads doesn't work instantaneously. Before launching, you need to cool down the guidance system, the seeker head, and that takes time. So let's just say there is practically no danger for aircraft. The operator won't be able to track an aircraft and launch a manpads using such a device. I mean the overall manpad system on the Shahed. Yes, the danger is a bit higher for helicopters because their maneuverability and speed are lower.
But for Shaheds, the danger is enormous. In addition to aviation and anti-aircraft guns, which have been successfully shooting down Russian UAVs for several years now, interceptor drones have now joined in, taking on a huge part of the work.
Interceptor drones have carved out a rather important niche for themselves. They're not a magic bullet, they won't repel every attack on the country, but they do destroy their share of Shaheds.
By the way, another record was set by the defense forces in December, destroying over 106,000 enemy targets, surpassing their own November numbers by more than 30% and setting a historic high for the destruction of Russian air defense and radar systems. In numbers, that came out to 4 units per day.
Overnight, the city of Dnipro came under a massive Russian drone attack. The occupiers targeted residential buildings and educational institutions. At least 7 people were injured. 2 of them are children. Most cases involved acute stress reactions, though there are also shrapnel wounds. One cannot help but wonder, does the Kremlin sadist feel satisfaction when he orders strikes on peaceful Ukrainian cities and towns? And another question, what goes through his mind when he realizes that his army of killers, rapists and looters still cannot capture Pokrovsk and Mirnograd? Next, what is happening right now in this most difficult section of the front line?
Putin is furious. He couldn't boast about capturing Pokrovsk for New Year's. This area of the front remains one of the hottest. Today, the key task for the defense forces is to hold back the enemy's advance and destroy their resources. In
Pokrovsk, fighting is taking place north of the railway. And in Mirnograd, it's exactly the same right now. Fighting is taking place in various parts of Mirnograd.
the enemy is trying to make the most of the weather conditions.
Under the thick concealing cover of heavy snowfall, the enemy can easily infiltrate our territory, effectively hide from our advanced drones' watchful view, and thus stealthily try to build up their formidable forces. This infiltration tactic is typical for them. It's quite dangerous in urban areas because you can hide in a basement, you can take cover. In other words, you can amass forces under the cover of the weather, and in this way create threats. With
the onset of frost, the occupiers have started using various types of equipment more frequently. and they are trying to bring their infantry as close as possible to our positions so they can begin the assault. Despite the enemy's attempts to advance, Ukrainian defenders made progress in the Pokrovsk direction in Rodinsky and Hryshine. Near Pokrovsk, Ukrainian soldiers destroyed a column of enemy forces on ATVs. Another S-300 air defense system radar was also destroyed in Donetsk region. The Russians, however, managed to advance along the N20 highway in the area between Kostiantinivka and Druzhkivka. Despite fierce fighting, the Russian side is spreading statements about the alleged complete occupation of Mirnohrad. They are backing these claims with propaganda. Videos from the southern outskirts of the city. The General Staff has denied information about the complete capture of Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, and several other cities. Most of Pokrovsk still remains in the gray zone. The fierce battle for every block continues. In
any street fighting today, there is no clear front line. There are positions that are scattered, not mixed together. There are our positions and there are enemy positions.
It's difficult to spot the occupiers in the city because they change into civilian clothes.
Russian troops in Pokrovsk are using civilian clothing for deception, which is tantamount to acts of perfidy, a war crime under the Geneva Convention.
The Institute for the Study of War believes that capturing Pokrovsk will bring Russia only a limited tactical effect, while the cost of such an offensive remains extremely high. Over the past 20 months, the offensive in the Donetsk region has cost the Kremlin an extraordinary amount. From October 2023 to the summer of 2024, Russian forces managed to advance 40 kilometers from Avdiivka to the outskirts of Pokrovsk. They paid for this with losses amounting to at least 5 divisions of armored vehicles, more than 1,000 armored personnel carriers, and over 500 tanks.
They don't care about losses. That is, losses for them are basically... They see territorial gains as essential, and they are willing to keep taking losses for it. Drones now control the air, and they are capable of detecting and destroying concentrations of equipment even before it reaches the line of contact.
According to analysts' estimates, in October alone, the Russians captured about 30 square kilometers near Pokrovsk, losing up to 25,000 soldiers. Faced with such massive losses, the occupying forces have revised their tactics. Instead of large mechanized assaults, they have switched to infiltrating with small infantry groups. This helps reduce equipment losses, especially under attacks from Ukrainian drones, but it comes with extremely high fatality rates. Among the soldiers,
they adopted infiltration tactics after we started deploying kill drones using UAVs. When they realized that armored assaults weren't working, that it was impossible to concentrate armored vehicles for breakthroughs on certain sections of the front, they began to act using infiltration methods. In the summer, they would hide in tree lines, advance under the cover of these tree lines, and later, as our defensive lines became more sparse, they tried to mass in groups. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this weather, the weather might be helping them. Snow, rain, fog, and so on.
Russia is exhausted by the prolonged positional warfare and has limited reserves and is unable to rapidly advance, especially considering the density of Ukrainian fortifications to the west of the city. At the same time, the occupiers are demonstrating a new tactic.
First, they systematically disrupt Ukrainian logistics using drones and then deploy infantry and sabotage groups to put pressure on the defenders. There is particular concern about the Russians' ability to strike at medium distances and weaken the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Fighting near the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration in the Donetsk region has been ongoing for almost a year and a half. Gerasimov has already reported the occupation of Pokrovsk to Putin 3 times. Such credit captures of cities no longer surprise even the Z military bloggers.
The Kremlin is exaggerating the importance of capturing Pokrovsk in order to present Russia's advance on the battlefield as inevitable. This sense of inevitability is shared by some members of President Donald Trump's negotiating team, who are trying to develop a peace proposal for the war in Ukraine.
Pokrovsk and Bernograd have already become flashpoints for him. They are already fighting within the settlements themselves. For them, of course, it's important to see this through to the end. Both from a political standpoint and in terms of information and image, it's important to them. Well, from my point of view as well. When the fighting for Pokrovsk and Bernograd ends, the forces will not be in a position to predict the outcome. For further offensives, but above all, this concerns Konstantinovka, Dobropilya, and the Slavyansk-Ambrosivka direction.
As long as Russia feels it is making progress on the battlefield, the Kremlin will not be interested in real negotiations, and diplomatic initiatives without halting the offensive will remain largely ineffective.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And now's the time to subscribe, like this video and share it so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine and Emmanuel Macron of France, together with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, signed a declaration of intent on the future deployment of multinational forces in Ukraine after the war ends. This happened in Paris during a meeting of European leaders in the format known as the Coalition of the Willing. According to President Macron, in any scenario, the first line of deterrence against future Russian aggression will be Ukraine's armed forces. Macron also stated that after the war, the Ukrainian army is expected to number 800,000 troops. Western partners have committed to supporting this force. Now it's worth taking a closer look at these commitments. But let me say this right away. We're talking about a draft declaration of the Coalition of the Willing on security guarantees for Ukraine. This document will almost certainly be revised. Here are, in my view, the key points of the draft. The United States will help ensure a ceasefire in Ukraine through intelligence and logistics. The United States will also monitor compliance with the ceasefire. Joint military planning is to be conducted for air, sea and land security, as well as for rebuilding Ukraine's armed forces. These measures will be implemented at Ukraine's request after a reliable ceasefire is in place. The United States commits to supporting the forces in case of an attack within the agreed security framework. Support in the event of a future Russian armed attack may include military capabilities, intelligence, logistics, diplomatic steps, and additional sanctions. Conclusion: this is a promising and needed plan, or rather a draft plan, whose main idea is simple: peace and silence in air, at sea, and on land. And what do Russian invaders demonstrate through their actions? Exactly the opposite: a clear unwillingness to stop the fighting. It's very similar to the peace plan, where everything is agreed upon except territorial issues, and without those, the entire plan remains unworkable. That does not mean these meetings and agreements are meaningless. Peace is getting closer, but there is still an enormous amount of work ahead, and that's only diplomacy. Talks in Paris will continue today in a narrower format. President Zelensky has traveled to Cyprus, where he met with President Nikos Christodoulidis and Archbishop Georgios. Ukrainian and Cypriot leaders will also discuss key issues with the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Meanwhile, Czech officials have confirmed that the country will not stop its ammunition initiative for Ukraine, but it will no longer pay for the shells from its own state budget. As a result, in a project launched almost 2 years ago, the Czech Republic will now act as a coordinator. And finally, about the sharp deterioration in Donald Trump's attitude toward Vladimir Putin. One clear sign: the White House is openly mocking Russian air defense systems. All the details next.
Donald Trump is believing less and less of what Vladimir Putin tells him. Here is the reaction of the US president aboard the presidential plane, Air Force One. There he stated that he does not believe Ukraine struck Putin's residence in Valdai.
I don't believe that strike happened. Something indeed happened in the immediate vicinity, however, it has absolutely nothing to do with this specific situation.
When a journalist asked a clarifying question about why, after his phone conversation with Putin, he initially believed him, Trump said that it was the first information he had heard regarding the strike on the residence.
He said that his house had been attacked. We don't believe that happened now that we've been able to check.
Trump also intends to introduce new sanctions against Russia if the Kremlin does not make concessions in the negotiations. Senator Lindsey Graham, who was also on board the presidential plane during questions about the strikes on Putin's residence, emphasized that the issue of sanctions against Russia is discussed every day. But for now, this information is not for disclosure. The Republican senator also stated that in his view, peace in Ukraine will be achieved under the threat of tariffs against Putin's clients. Graham is convinced that the example of India, which reduced its oil purchases from Russia after Trump imposed tariffs, shows that this approach works. The attitude of Trump and the United States toward Putin and Russia is rapidly deteriorating. This became especially noticeable after the special operation in Venezuela. After Maduro's arrest, Pentagon Chief Pete Hackstead openly mocked the work of Venezuela's air defense system, which had been purchased from Russia.
3 nights ago, nearly 200 of our best Americans entered the center of Caracas. It seems that this Russian air defense system didn't work all that well. Isn't that right? They captured a man wanted by American justice without losing a single American citizen.
The Trump administration's attitude toward Russia and the U.S. position on Venezuela's future were voiced by their Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He made it clear that the United States would not allow Venezuela to become an operational hub for Iran, Russia, or China. Moreover, according to Rubio, the U.S. does not need Venezuelan oil since the country has enough of its own resources. The main goal is to prevent Russia and other rivals from increasing their influence in Venezuela's oil industry.
This is the Western Hemisphere. We live here and we will not allow it to become an operational base for adversaries, competitors, and rivals.
Washington will primarily restrict investments from Russia, China, and Iran in Venezuela's oil industry. The interest of these countries in Venezuela's black gold is no coincidence. After Maduro's arrest, the U.S. wants to resume the operations of its companies in Venezuela and increase the country's budget revenues. The Putin and Maduro regimes have been strategic partners since 2006. The Kremlin gave Caracas nearly $20 billion in loans in exchange for loyalty and support. Now, after the arrest of the Venezuelan dictator, Russia has lost yet another ally. And with these actions, the US is putting pressure on Putin, signaling that he will have to make compromises in peace negotiations with Ukraine.
If the Americans come in, set up production, the taxes that American companies paid to the Venezuelan budget as royalties for developing the country's natural resources were significant. And as we know, in the 1960s and 1970s, before nationalization and then after, so to speak, the rise of the Chavez and Maduro regime to the political stage, Venezuela was practically the richest country in Latin America.
It seems that Trump and his administration have radically changed their attitude toward Putin and his policies and have completely taken Ukraine's side. At the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, which took place on January 6th, the United States was represented by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. From Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky and the new head of the office, Kirilo Budanov, arrived in Paris. The main topic is security guarantees and the deployment of a U.S. military contingent on Ukrainian territory.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. See you next time.